Long ago, someone observed tall oaks from little acorns grow. As you might have guessed from the opening image, and now this one, our lesson today has something to do with oak trees. Did you know our planet holds over 600 kinds of oak trees? And that if fortune favors them, they can live over 1,000 years? When I put out the word this week for oak tree images, one explorer classmate suggested how cool it would be to show a seedling growing from its acorn. So I went outside in the almost dark and poked around my yard, and sure enough, I found this one and dug it up. I did try to identify it, maybe a laurel oak, maybe a live oak. Whatever its name, my plan is to replant it in a pot, tend it, and hope that in the centuries after I'm gone, it will be glad it got to star in an iMovie and then get back to its work of growing. The story you're about to hear happened 4,000 years ago. The older I get, the more that seems like the blink of an eye. It happened at a place called the Oaks of Mamre. You can still find the place called Oaks of Mamre. Go 19 miles south of Jerusalem to a Palestinian city called Hebron, nestled in the Judean mountains. When you reach Hebron, which by the way was established in the early Bronze Age, 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, ask them to point you about 1.5 miles northwest to Ramat al-Khalil, which means heights of the friend. The friend referred to is Father Abraham, first of the patriarchs, revered by people of 3 faiths, Jews, Christians, and Muslims. So yes, if you've a mind to, you can go to the Oaks of Mamre, heights of the friend, and stand for yourself on holy ground, if not in fact, then in your imagination. Our Abraham text for this day of the church year is Genesis 18, 1 through 15. We should back up a little bit first to the second half of Genesis 17. Listen. And God said to Abraham, Sarai, your wife, shall no longer call her name Sarai, for Sarah is her name. And I will bless her, and I will also give you from her a son, and I will bless him, and she shall become nations. Kings of peoples shall issue from her. And Abraham flung himself on his face, and he laughed, saying to himself, To 100-year-old will a child be born? Will 90-year-old Sarah give birth? And Abraham said to God, Would that Ishmael might live in your favor. And God said, Yet Sarah, your wife, is to bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his seed after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Look, I will bless him and make him fruitful, and will multiply him most abundantly. 12 chieftains he shall beget, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear you by this season next year. And he finished speaking with him, and God ascended from Abraham. And Abraham took Ishmael his son, and all the slaves born in his household, and those purchased with silver, every male among the people of Abraham's household, and he circumcised the flesh of their foreskin on that very day, as God had spoken to him. And Abraham was 99 years old when the flesh of his foreskin was circumcised. And Ishmael his son was 13 years old when the flesh of his foreskin was circumcised. On that very day, Abraham was circumcised, and Ishmael his son, and all the men of his household, those born in the household, and those purchased with silver from the foreigners, were circumcised with him. This story continues in chapter 18. And the Lord appeared to him in the oaks of Mamre, when he was sitting by the tent flap in the heat of the day. And he raised his eyes and saw, and look, 3 men were standing before him. He saw, and he ran toward them from the tent flap and bowed to the ground. And he said, My Lord, if I have found favor in your eyes, please do not go on past your servant. Let a little water be fetched, and bathe your feet, and stretch out under the tree. And let me fetch a morsel of bread, and refresh yourselves. Then you may go on, for have you not come by your servant? And they said, Do as you have spoken. And Abraham hurried to the tent to Sarah, and he said, Hurry, knead 3 seahs of choice semolina flour, and make loaves. And to the herd Abraham ran, and fetched a tender and goodly calf, and gave it to the lad, who hurried to prepare it. And he fetched curds and milk, and the calf that had been prepared, and he set these before them, he standing over them under the tree, and they ate. And they said to him, Where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, There, in the tent. And he said, I will surely return to you at this very season, and look, a son shall Sarah, your wife, have. And Sarah was listening at the tent flap, which was behind him. And Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. Sarah no longer had her woman's flow. And Sarah laughed inwardly, saying, After being shriveled, shall I have pleasure? And my husband is old? And the Lord said to Abraham, Why is it that Sarah laughed, saying, Shall I really give birth, old as I am? Is anything beyond the Lord? In due time I will return to you at this very season, and Sarah shall have a son. And Sarah dissembled, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, Yes, you did laugh. Sometimes a story is so good that I just have to write a poem about it. So bear with me as I share my little rhyme. Along the way, enjoy these oak tree images provided by my classmates, myself, and interested others. When Abraham, in the land of Ur, was just a little lad, he worked in the family business, the idol shop of his dad. From oak they crafted gods for Mesopotamian folks. At some point, Abe decided these gods were nothing but jokes. And it began to dawn on him that God is unseen mystery, who nonetheless keeps showing up, demanding that Abe make history. Now, Abe loved beautiful Sarah, a girl and 10 years younger. When she was grown, they married. For each other they did hunger. At God's behest, they pulled up stakes and moved to Canaan so fair. In tents they dwelt and prospered. Respected were they there. But God had promised children, and children never came. So they trudged along the best they could, and each day seemed the same. At 75, Sarah decided they'd waited much too long, so she sent her maid to lie with Abe. Back then, this wasn't wrong. And Hagar the maid bore a bouncing boy, Ishmael by name, and strutted around before Sarah. The household was never the same. 13 years later, God showed up with a startling surprise. Abe and his male relations must all be circumcised. Now Abe was 100 years old, various ages all the others, when they surrendered their foreskins, though this surely was not their druthers. So 100-year Abe's recovering, and 90 his beautiful bride, they're camped with their kinfolk and servants, with the oaks of Mamre outside. Now Canaan was graced with trees, and the finest were the oaks, sturdy and tall, with shade for all, a blessing for hot, weary folks. And Abe was gingerly sitting at the mouth of his tent one day, when the oak trees over him whispered that strangers were on the way. Now Abe could fight when he had to, but his preference was shalom. When strangers come, to them you run, invite them into your home. So angels enjoy beneath the oaks their Sabbath, while Abraham hurries to lay a feast before them. Their religion, the least of his worries. Like him, they had covered some miles through unforgiving land. Like him, they were weary to death of heat and rocks and sand. They probably had some stories, perhaps some wisdom to share, so why not treat them with respect, with courtesy and care? Meanwhile, Sarah, like ladies of old, stayed carefully out of sight, but you can believe she was listening with all her might. When one of the angels revealed that Sarah would finally conceive, her heart leapt with joy. But then she laughed. This was something she couldn't believe. Her laughter she thought she had muffled. Her derision she thought she had hid. God called her on it, and when she lied, quoth God, "Oh, Sarah, you did." And sure enough, Abe knew Sarah. It's not over till it's over. Within a year, baby Isaac was born, their son, their four-leaf clover. How fitting that Isaac means laughter, a miracle, something new. Perhaps God smiled at the future as the tribe of Abraham grew. The oak trees north of Hebron are surely gone by now, but it's likely their sturdy children still grace fair Canaan's brow. It's likely they rustle and whisper, "My, how centuries fly," outside the sacred cave where Abe and Sarah lie. These sprightly children of God, not perfect, but oh, they loved the earth they walked, the days they lived, with millions of stars above. And so the story of Abraham and Sarah. Of course, there are lots of different kind of trees besides oak trees, and several of you were good enough to send them, and I just happen to have some of my own. So we'll have a little montage to close and a cool song about the great I Am.
No matter how you're feeling now or what do you go through, still